My apologies, this video is a day late, but I will be posting it today. Better late than never. Saint Anthony is a name associated with several Christian saints. The two main proponents are Saint Anthony the Great, also known as Saint Anthony of Egypt or Anthony of the Desert, and Saint Anthony of Padua. The feast day will be of the first, Saint Anthony the Great. His birth name was simply Anthony. He was born at 251 AD in Coma, modern-day Qamans in Egypt. He passed away on January 17th, 356 AD in Mount Qulzum, near the Red Sea in Egypt. His feast day is January 17th. Saint Anthony the Great, often referred to as the father of monasticism, was an early Christian monk and ascetic. He was born to wealthy Christian parents. He inherited a large estate upon their passing. He was inspired by the gospel message, "If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give them to the poor." Quoted from Matthew chapter 19, verse 21. He consequently distributed his wealth and embraced a life of solitude in the Egyptian desert. Anthony is renowned for his spiritual battles against temptations, often depicted in the art as the Temptation of Saint Anthony. He lived in isolation for many years, practicing extreme asceticism, prayer, and fasting, which is inspired a movement of hermits and monks throughout the Christian world. His life was chronicled by Saint Athanasius of Alexandria in the work The Life of Anthony, which popularized monasticism in the Christian East and West. Saint Anthony is venerated as a patron saint of monasticism and those suffering from skin disease, particularly ergotism, known as St. Peter's Fire. His relics were later moved to Alexandria and eventually to France. Saint Anthony the Great, born in 251 AD and passed away in 356 AD, is also known as Anthony the Great or Anthony of the Desert. He is primarily remembered for his profound spiritual life, asceticism, and the establishment of monasticism, rather than specific miracles. However, his life, as recorded by Saint Athanasius of Alexandria in The Life of Anthony, includes several miraculous events and supernatural occurrences attributed to his deep faith and sanctity. Here's a brief description of key miracles associated with Saint Anthony the Great. Healing of the sick. Throughout his life, particularly during his times in the desert, circa 285 to 356 AD, in the villages near Coma, his birthplace, in primarily the desert area where people sought him for blessings and healings. Anthony is widely known for his ability to heal the sick through prayer. Many people traveled to his hermitage seeking cures for physical and spiritual ailments. His prayers were said to relieve suffering, cure diseases, and exorcise demons, spirits from their bodies. This often reinforced his reputation as a holy man and intercessor for divine grace. Casting out demons. Throughout his life, particularly during his hermitage in the desert, between 270 AD and 356 AD, near again the villages of Coma and its hermitage in the desert, Saint Anthony frequently performed exorcisms, driving out demons from individuals afflicted by possession. His authority over evil spirits was attributed to his deep faith, prayer, and fasting. A notable event was a man who was possessed was brought to Anthony, who prayed over him and commanded the demon to leave. The demon departed with a loud cry, and the man was restored to health. He's also known for his protection from demonic assaults, especially during his hermitage in 270 to 356 AD in the desert, particularly in his hermitage near Mount Kulzum. Anthony endured intense spiritual battles with demonic forces during his years in solitude. These assaults included physical attacks, terrifying visions, and temptations. Despite the severity of these encounters, he remained unharmed and unwavering in his faith. A notable example is once Anthony spent a night in an abandoned tomb where he was violently attacked by demons. According to the account, the Lord appeared to him in a vision and healed his wounds. Anthony asked why God allowed him to suffer, and the Lord replied, "I was here, Anthony, but I wanted to see your fight." These experiences demonstrated Anthony's spiritual resilience and victory over evil. Another example of his miracles is the miracle of the spring. This occurred sometime during his time in the desert between 285 AD and 356 AD on Mount Kulzum in Egypt. In his hermitage in the desert, Anthony was said to have discovered or caused a spring of fresh water to flow, providing sustenance to the arid region. This enabled him and other hermits to survive in an otherwise inhospitable environment. This event symbolized divine providence and Anthony's reliance on God. Another example is the guidance to St. Paul of Thebes. This occurred around 342 AD in the desert of Thebes, Egypt. Anthony received a vision instructing him to visit St. Paul of Thebes, another hermit who lived a life of solitude. Upon meeting Paul, Anthony found him nourished by a miraculous raven that brought bread daily. When Paul passed away, Anthony witnessed angels carrying Paul's soul to heaven. This event emphasized divine intervention in Anthony's life and his role as spiritual guide and witness to holiness in others. There's also the miracle of the multiplication of bread. This occurred during his years in the desert in Mount Kulzum, Egypt. On many occasions, when Anthony shared his scarce provision with visitors or fellow monks, the bread he had was said to multiply miraculously, ensuring everyone was fed. This recalls the biblical miracles of multiplication performed by Christ himself and underscores Anthony's generosity and reliance of divine providence. There's also miracles of preservation from harm throughout his life, particularly during travels to various places, in particular his journeys to Alexandria. Despite living in dangerous and hostile environments, Anthony was repeatedly preserved from harm by divine intervention. Whether crossing perilous terrain or enduring persecution during times of Christian oppression, Anthony's safety was seen as a sign of divine protection. During a visit to Alexandria to support persecuted Christians, Anthony remained unharmed despite threats from opponents of the faith. There were also many visions of soul of Amun ascending to heaven. This occurred during his time in the desert near Mount Kalzim, Egypt. Anthony was said to have witnessed the soul of Amun, a fellow monk, being carried to heaven by angels. His vision confirmed the holiness of Amun's life and provided Anthony with a glimpse of the rewards awaiting the faithful. The visions reaffirmed the hope of eternal life and encouraged others in their spiritual journey. The intercession of a deceased man. This occurred during his time in the desert in Egypt. While grieving a family member who came to Anthony seeking prayers for a recently deceased loved one. After Anthony prayed, the man was miraculously restored to life. This miracle underscores Anthony's role as an intercessor and his extraordinary closeness to God. After St. Anthony's passing in 356 AD, many miracles were attributed to his intercession, particularly healings of physical and spiritual ailments. His relics were venerated in various places, including the monastery of St. Anthony in Egypt and later in the Constantinople and France. St. Anthony the Great's miracles reflect his profound faith, spiritual authority, and dedication to God. Though it's not as focused on his miracles as other saints, his life itself, marked by divine protection, guidance, and spiritual triumph, has inspired countless Christians to pursue a life of holiness and devotion. His legacy as a miracle worker endures through the continued veneration of his life and intercession. Saint Anthony the Great, born in 251 AD and passed away in 356 AD, also known as Anthony of Egypt or Anthony of the Desert, is one of the most important figures in Christian monasticism. His iconography reflects his role as the father of monasticism and his life of asceticism in the Egyptian desert. Here's a brief description of his iconography, including the symbolism, settings, and elements typically depicted. His general attire is usually a monastic habit. He's often depicted wearing a simple, tattered brown or black robe, often with a hooded cowl. This attire signifies humility and asceticism, reflecting his life as one of the first Christian monks. He often is shown with a staff with a tau cross or T-cross. The tau cross, often held at the top of his staff, symbolizes his devotion and leadership in the monastic community. It also represents his role as a shepherd or of monks and defender of the faith. He's often shown as well with a bell in his hand or attached to his staff, which is often in his depictions. Bells are used by hermits to ward off evil spirits and as a call to prayer. He's sometimes shown with a pig or wild boar. These are often typically depicted at his feet, symbolizing the temptations and demonic battles he faced in the desert. Over time, this pig also became associated with the healing of diseases, particularly St. Anthony's fire or ergotism. In some depictions, the pig is subdued or tamed, representing Anthony's triumph over evil. Flame or fires are sometimes shown near him, symbolizing his spiritual fervor, divine illumination, or the fiery trials of temptation he endured. This is also connects to Saint Anthony's fire, diseases cured through his intercession. He's often shown with books or a scroll. Often holding these items representing his wisdom and spiritual teaching. The book may also signify the scriptures which Anthony meditated on during his hermitage. He's also shown wearing with demonic figures or grotesque creatures, as common in scenes of the temptations of Saint Anthony. These figures symbolize the spiritual and psychological battles he endured in solitude. Finally, like many other saints, Saint Anthony is depicted with a halo symbolizing his sanctity and divine favor. The desert is often featured. It is part of the context or settings, as St. Anthony is frequently depicted in an arid desert settings, highlighting his life of solitude and asceticism in the wilderness of Egypt. Elements in caves, mountains, or palm trees may be included to represent his hermitage. To depict scenes of his temptation, one of the most iconic scenes is in his iconography is the temptation of Saint Anthony. These depictions show Anthony surrounded by demonic figures, often grotesque and surreal, trying to distract him from prayer and devotion. This theme is popular in both Eastern and Western Christian art, as well as in later European Renaissance and Baroque art. Often, the iconography shows scenes of healing and charity. He sometimes is depicted healing the sick, particularly those afflicted with ergotism or St. Anthony's fire. There are, of course, many regional variation in the iconography. With Eastern Orthodox iconography, the Orthodox tradition, Saint Anthony is shown as a thin, ascetic figure with long white beards. Icons emphasize his spiritual depth as well as his role as a desert father, often showing him in prayer or standing with other monastic saints such as Saint Paul of Thebes. While as in Western Christian art, these Western depictions focus more on his battles against temptations and his role as a protector against disease. These images often highlight his interactions with demonic forces and his connection to the sick and suffering. Prominent locations and artwork depicting Saint Anthony the Great include the Church of Saint Anthony in Egypt, the Monastery of Saint Anthony Derma Antonius in Egypt is one of the oldest monasteries in the world and often houses iconography of the saint. Then there's also in European art, artists such as Hieronymus Bosch and Matthias Grunwald created famous works depicting the temptation of Saint Anthony, showcasing his spiritual struggles in surreal and dramatic ways. Finally, there are many monasteries dedicated to Saint Anthony. Found across Europe and the Middle East, there are many churches and monasteries, often displaying his traditional icons of Saint Anthony. St. Anthony the Great's iconography emphasizes themes of solitude, spiritual warfare, humility, and triumph over temptation. His symbols and settings continue to inspire both devotional art and reflections on the monastic life. Saint Anthony the Great lived during the early centuries of Christianity, a time before the formalized process of the canonization process by the Catholic Church was established. The recognition of saints in his era followed a more organic process rooted in local veneration, the writings of the Church Fathers, and liturgical recognition rather than the structured procedures we use today. Here's a brief explanation of how St. Anthony the Great came to be recognized as a saint, including historical context, key individuals, and locations. During the 4th century and beyond, in Egypt, the primary area of influence, particularly Alexandria, and eventually the wider Christian world, the canonization process started because of Anthony's lifetime. The formal canonization did not exist at this time. However, saints were proclaimed through popular and public acclamation based on their holy lives, martyrdom, or miracles. Anthony's sanctity became evident during his lifetime through his asceticism, spiritual leadership, and miraculous occurrences. The role of Saint Athanasius played an important role. This occurred during the time of 360 AD, shortly after Saint Anthony's death in 356 in Alexandria, Egypt. The primary source of Saint Anthony's sanctity and spiritual legacy is Saint Athanasius of Alexandria, who wrote the Life of Anthony Vita Antoni, a seminal hagiography. This work spread St. Anthony's fame throughout the Christian world, particularly in Eastern and Western churches. St. Athanasius is a patriarch of Alexandria and a staunch defender of the Nicene Christianity. Athanasius played a key role in promoting Anthony as a model of Christian monasticism and spiritual perfection. The life of Anthony was translated into multiple languages, including Latin, Greek, and Coptic, and was widely read among Christians. The book established Anthony's reputation as a holy man and father of monasticism. It contributed to the spread of monastic ideals and led to the informal recognition of Anthony as a saint. The development of his veneration occurred during the 4th to 6th centuries. In Egypt, it was due in large part to his hermitage at Mount Kulzim, which became a pilgrimage site. In the Byzantine Empire's churches and monasteries were named in his honor. Whilst in Western Europe, his veneration spread through translations of the life of Anthony. Anthony's veneration grew rapidly after his passing due to his spiritual legacy. Monasteries dedicated to him were established, included in Egypt, with the monastery of Saint Anthony, one of the oldest monasteries in the world, built near his hermitage. Numerous Eastern Orthodox and Coptic churches began celebrating his feast day on January 17th. The recognition in Eastern Orthodox churches occurred sometime between 4th and 5th centuries. The Eastern Orthodox Church recognized Anthony as a saint early on, primarily through his inclusion in liturgical commemorations and widespread reading of the life of Anthony. He was honored as a monastic pioneer and spiritual guide. St. Athanasius promoted his life and teaching through his writings. Other desert fathers, such as St. Pachomius and St. Macarius, continued St. Anthony's legacy. His feast day in the Eastern Church is January 17th and is designated as his day in the liturgical calendar. While as the Western Church recognition occurred sometime in the 5th to 7th centuries through the translation of the life of Anthony into Latin by Evagrius of Antioch. Anthony's story reached the Western Empire. This translation played a significant role in his recognition as a saint in the West, particularly among early monastic communities such as those founded by Saint Benedict of Nursia. January 7 was also adopted by the Western Church as his feast day, reflecting the unity in his veneration across many Christian traditions. The medieval expansion of his veneration, which occurred during the 10th to 13th centuries, particularly in France, with the Order of St. Anthony, the Hospitallers of St. Anthony, which was founded in 1095 with a focus of caring for those afflicted by ergotism, also known as St. Anthony's Fire. Whilst in Italy and beyond, churches dedicated to St. Anthony became prominent. By the medieval period, Anthony's veneration had spread widely across Europe, further cementing his status as a saint. The Hospitallers of St. Anthony played a major role in popularizing his devotion in the West. Key elements of his recognition as a saint include the spiritual authority of his life of asceticism and spiritual wisdom, which became a model for many Christians. The widespread veneration by his followers and admirers in both Eastern and Western churches ensured his memory endured. The liturgical recognition, or his inclusion in the liturgical calendar of various Christian traditions, formalized his status as a saint. In conclusion, St. Anthony the Great was never formally canonized in the modern sense, as the process did not exist during this time. Instead, his sanctity was recognized through the widespread acclaim of Christian faithful, the influential writings of St. Athanasius, and his inclusion in the liturgical calendars of both Eastern and Western churches. His feast day is celebrated on January 17th across many Christian traditions, and he remains a towering figure in the history of Christian monasticism. His enduring veneration is a testament to his profound spiritual legacy and the miraculous power attributed to his intercession.